Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. I'm a journalist, and one of the great sins of journalists is pretending that politics is easier than it really is, which brings me to the government's inflammatory plan to remove the right to a jury trial, except for crimes where the punishment would be 3 years in prison or more. That means that people accused of many frauds, thefts, burglary offences, of drug dealing and criminal damage and some sexual crimes won't be able to put their case to 12 randomly chosen fellow citizens. Big moment. The Justice Secretary, David Lammy, has watered down his original idea, which was to ditch jury trials for anything below sentences of 5 years, because he thought the public wouldn't wear that. Why did he think this? Because the government had leaked the original plan to see what people thought, which is, I think, a rotten way of doing business on such a serious matter, and pretty contemptuous of Parliament as well. But I said we shouldn't pretend that matters aren't complicated. In this case, if we keep jury trials for all serious offences, a great tradition going back to Anglo-Saxon times and part of what makes us us, then we have to keep putting up with the backlog and the endless delays in the court system, which can deny plaintiffs justice for 3 or 4 years or even more. And in the old phrase, justice delayed is justice denied. But, oh yes, there is the third option, which is to spend a lot more money on our legal system to get it up and working fast and efficiently. But that requires higher taxes, and we saw last week with the budget just how popular that idea is. So which way would you vote? 1, cancel jury trials for thousands of defendants. 2, delay justice for rape victims and people whose houses were ransacked, people defrauded of their savings, make them hang on for years in a legal limbo. Or 3, get everyone to pay more tax. Let us, for once, this evening, not pretend it's an easy choice. And let's go first to somebody making those difficult choices, the Courts Minister, Sarah Sackman. Sarah, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Can I start by asking whether you are actually convinced that today's changes are going to speed things up in the courts? Because it's only, I think, 3% of cases that are in front of a jury at the moment.
I am convinced. We inherited a record and rising backlog. You mentioned that in your introduction. We've currently got 80,000 cases, criminal cases, waiting to be heard. And behind each and every one of those cases, there's an individual victim. There's somebody who's been accused of a crime waiting to clear their name. Right now in London, a victim of crime reporting their crime may be told that that trial may not come on until 2029, 2030. That's intolerable. That's why we asked Sir Brian Leveson to conduct an independent review, collect the evidence, get the experts in, and give us a blueprint for how we can come up with a plan to bring down the backlog. And that's what we've put forward today.
Wouldn't it be more important to, for instance, let courts, make courts sit all the time, including over weekends, extend court sittings, than this kind of thing? Wouldn't that be the faster way of getting things justice?
Our courts are motoring. Currently, our Crown Courts are hearing 30% more cases than they were pre-COVID. We've invested in increased numbers of sitting days. That's the number of days that a judge can sit there hearing cases. We've invested in more legal aid. We're investing in new court buildings. We are making that investment. But what Brian Leveson's report tells us is investment alone won't be enough. What we need is investment coupled with systemic reform. And that's the plan we've brought forward today.
This means that more and more plaintiffs are going to be in front, defendants rather, are going to be in front of single judges. Now, those judges are not really representative of the country, are they? I mean, do you know how many are black, for instance? How many of our judges are black? Percentage?
It's true to say that
1%.
It's true to say that our judiciary is not as diverse as we would want it to be. But I think it's really important to put our current system in a bit of context. 90% of cases are currently heard without a jury. That's over 1 million cases a year that are heard in our magistrates' court, either by magistrates or by judge alone. So that's currently the case. We reserve jury trial for the most serious cases. And what today's proposals are about is delivering for swifter justice for victims right across the criminal justice system and ensuring we preserve jury trial in a timely fashion for the most serious cases.
Today we've also had the Angelini report into the way we treat sex attacks, particularly in public places. And there are some very, very strong recommendations about data and about funding and about spreading best practice to all police units around the country. Are you going to take all of those on board and actually act on them?
This is a really important report that was triggered in the wake of the murder of Sarah Everard, a deep reminder of the extent of violence against women and girls in our society, and also the fact that at the moment, whether it's policing or other government agencies, are not doing enough. And we're really committed to halving violence against women and girls. It's why, as a government, we're going to take today's report seriously. I know the Home Secretary is looking carefully at the recommendations and, importantly, will act on them.
Can I ask specifically about rape? Because I was reading something from one of your own MPs today who said that if you are raped in London now and you are brave enough to report it and the police pursue the case, it won't be till 2030 that your case is likely to be heard.
I mean, that's the scale of the delay
That's
that we're
shocking,
talking about.
isn't it?
It's appalling. I don't know anyone who can sit here and defend the status quo. It's why bold reform is needed. It's why we've got to fix the backlog. I mean, I met yesterday with a victim of rape. She reported her crime. Her name was Katie. A crime at the hands of her violent partner. It took 5 years for her case to come to court. Now, that's not justice at all, because in many of these rape cases, we know that from the moment of reporting, 60% of victims of rape are actually pulling out of their cases because they can't face it anymore. That means that there are people who are guilty that are walking free, and I just won't have that.
There are strong mutterings in the profession that barristers will go on strike because of these changes. Have you heard that, and what message would you send to barristers who are thinking that way?
Look, I know that there's a mixture of views, and I engage regularly with the barristers' profession. They do really important work. They ensure that these cases can be tried properly and fairly, that the evidence can be tested. It's why, as part of today's package, it's not just about reform. We recognise the job that they do. It's why we're going to be adding an additional £34 million a year to barristers' fees to help them do that vital work. And I hope that they will continue to engage constructively with government so we can all get the system back on its feet. I know they care about the system, and so do I.
An awful lot of, I know it's a different part of the justice system, but prisons don't seem to be very good at holding prisoners in.
Huge pressure. We've got to get a grip. It's why we've asked Dame Lynn Owens to look into it for us. I'm not going to comment on individual cases because it's important the police
or even to tell us
that.
whether either of those two people have been apprehended yet.
As far as I'm aware, they remain at large, but I'm not going to comment on police operations. What I can say is that as a government, we are getting a grip on what is a very serious issue, but ultimately, we need to rebuild our prison system, just like we need to rebuild our court system. That's going to take time, but you've got a government that's determined to fix it instead of turning a blind eye.
All right, Sarah Sackman, Courts Minister, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. And now let's hear from one of the Prime Minister's successors in the role of Director of Public Prosecutions, Sir Max Hill. How big an injustice is caused by the current backlog in the systems, especially for victims of serious crimes such as rape?
It is severe. I have to say, though, that I think rape is perhaps not the best example to use. Although I think the essential facts that you presented are true, where we have reached in terms of the overall backlog is that is strangling progress across all serious crime types, with the possible exception of murder and terrorism, which are fast-tracked, generally speaking. So we do have an issue. The question is whether you are persuaded that the state of things is such that we need to make some change. Now, after my years of service as DPP, I am persuaded that we can't go on like this, although I would say that a decade, if not a decade and a half of attrition in terms of a woeful underfunding of the system at all parts is largely, but not exclusively, to blame here. But we are where we are. We have to decide how to move forward. And the proposals that we heard this afternoon from the Justice Secretary are not what was being trailed through the leak last week. So they are less draconian, if you like, than was being suggested to be the case.
We are back to manipulation by leak, I fear. One of the arguments that's being used in the House of Commons is that I think only 3% of trials go in front of a jury at the moment. If these measures say halve that, it doesn't look like it's going to make enough of a difference to really shift the backlog. In other words, is this proposal nearly enough to make the changes we need?
Well, if you look at change by total volume of everything that is dealt with in the Magistrates' Court and the Crown Court, this change perhaps doesn't make so much of a difference. But when you factor in the true fact that over 90% of all charged criminal cases coming before a public court are dealt with on a non-jury basis in the Magistrates' Court, then I do think the changes that are proposed will make a significant difference to the remaining volume of those Crown Court cases, Although I think it's important to say this announcement shouldn't be read as a criticism of juries or somehow saying they're not fit for purpose. They're vital in our system because they provide what I would call validation of everything that's gone before in terms of investigation and prosecution. And we need that validation. The question for debate now is whether that validation should be preserved for a slightly smaller cohort of cases, making room for those, allowing greater speed, or whether we should simply stay precisely as we are with no change at all.
What would you say to those people charged with, for instance, burglary or criminal damage or some sex offences, which will no longer be able to go to a jury trial? In other words, people who may feel burningly strongly that they are innocent and they want a trial in front of their peers and they're going to lose that right.
Well, I agree with the fundamental principle of the right to trial by jury. That is applicable to the 90-odd% of cases that are dealt with either by magistrates, i.e. lay bench volunteers, or by single professional judges called district judges in the magistrates' court. So yes, there is some change here. And I accept that in an individual case, it may be a burglar or it may be a certain type of low-level drug offence, where previously you would get a jury trial if you asked for it, now you won't. I don't think, though, that is a dramatic change or a stepping back from the principle which still applies, subject to one caveat, Andrew, and that is that I heard the announcement to say that it will be crimes that carry a likely sentence of less than 3 years that will be tried by judge alone. Now, in lawyer language, does less than 3 years mean that's the indicative sentence, i.e. in the circumstances of the case, that's what an individual's likely to get, or does it mean the statutory maximum? There's a big difference between the two. I hope it means statutory maximum. In other words, every case that might be met with more than 3 years imprisonment by statutory maximum will go before a jury. Take a simple example. Under the Public Order Act, an affray conducted by a single individual has a maximum permissible sentence of 3 years. So that looks like judge only. But a violent disorder, which is one step up from that, involving at least 3 people involved, will still be tried by a jury. That is where I hope the demarcation is. We will have to see what kind of impact it has. I accept a lot of arguments about expenditure, about underfunding in the system. I would call for that alongside these proposals, because that's needed too, from the court estate to available judges and to paying the lawyers for doing a job that they do supremely well. But I don't think this is doomsday for the jury system.
Max, let me ask you a general question at the end then. You've talked quite a lot about underfunding. How much has underfunding over the last decade or so damaged the criminal justice system in Britain?
I think there's been enormous damage. Let me give you a statistic from the year that I arrived as DPP at the CPS, the end of 2018. If you take the annual operating budget that the now Prime Minister enjoyed in 2010 at the time of the general election, and you compare that with the annual operating budget I had 8 years later, there was a reduction of 44%. And that led to a reduction of 30% in headcount at the CPS. I spent 5 years trying to build that up through successive spending rounds, making bids to the Treasury for more. My successor, Stephen Parkinson, I understand, made a successful bid for more under the current 3-year spending round. But that has to be matched with some really appropriate spending on defence legal aid, which the CPS doesn't govern, which sits within the Ministry of Justice, because we have, I'm afraid, seen a lot of very able lawyers voting with their feet and choosing to ply their trade in other areas because the funding streams are better, and you can't blame them for doing that. So to bring them back, there needs to be more robust funding.
Well, I hope the former DPP, the current Prime Minister, is considering these matters. Max Hill, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC.
Thank you.
The Angiolini inquiry investigating crimes against women and girls after the murder of Sarah Everard had a scathing review of the police's commitment to protecting women today. I'm going to be speaking to Mina Smallman, whose 2 daughters were tragically murdered in 2020. But you're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr. The time now, 6:16.
Player and the new LBC app.
There have been strong indications over the past couple of days that the Prime Minister is thinking of moving us closer towards Europe. A wise tilt on the tiller or reckless politics? Let's hear from Alexandra Hall, the former diplomat who served as Brexit counsellor in the British Embassy in Washington and left her post because of what she described as disingenuous language around Brexit. Alexandra, thank you very much for talking to LBC tonight. We've had two speeches now from the Prime Minister which have kind of foregrounded the damage, the economic damage that Brexit has done, which implies that he's thinking of doing something about it, perhaps going back to, I don't know, the customs union. What's your judgment about the mood of the country to that kind of change?
So I'm not based in the UK, so I can't speak for the mood of the country. What I can say is that the Prime Minister is making the first tentative steps towards acknowledging and informing the British people that our economy will not grow as long as we continue to have these trading obstacles with our nearest and largest trading partner, which is the EU. And he should have been clear about this long before. He's been almost as disingenuous as the Boris Johnson government.
We've seen all sorts of hesitations, particularly from the Labour Party, I think, about this. It's been the subject nobody dares talk about. The word Brexit itself can't be mentioned. That is beginning to change, I guess, because the Prime Minister feels his back is rather against the wall and the country is desperate for growth. And if there was ever a moment to put it back on the agenda, this is the moment.
So I think you made a very good observation when you introduced the topic by saying, is this politically risky? And my assumption is that the Labour government has been hesitant to speak more boldly about the costs of Brexit for fear of losing voters who voted in favour of it. So what they have done, and why I accuse them of being disingenuous, is they have kept on saying it's about the Brexit deal, as if there was going to be a perfect deal that could have been obtained, and all that happened was that we just got bad terms from the EU. Yeah. But that is not the issue. The issue is that Brexit cost us. And Starmer was correct to say that we needed to have a more honest discussion about the trade-offs. But his party was also guilty of not being honest about the trade-offs in our relationship with the EU. One can recognise that the EU has its problems, that there are pros and cons to being associated with it, but there are also pros and cons with leaving it. And if he is to make growth a priority, you cannot have policy making based on the fiction that Brexit has been a complete success. Even writers in The Telegraph and The Times and economists who once backed Brexit are now coming out and saying, actually, we're beginning to see it hasn't worked out as planned. But we have to get away from the lie that the only issue was the terms on which we left the EU and that it was the deal. It wasn't. It was Brexit itself posed costs, and there was no cost-free way to leave the EU. And now those costs are coming home. So he's right to be talking about it, but he actually needs to be bolder.
Well, we're going to come back to this subject later in the show, but for now, Alexandra, thank you very, very much indeed for that. Now, we were discussing the overhaul of juries at the beginning of the show, and here's another area where insufficient funding and justice collide. Lady Eilish Angelini's inquiry into the murder of Sarah Everard by a police officer has said that has attacked the government for underfunding and said that lives are at stake. Let's hear now from Mina Smallman, the retired Church of England priest whose two daughters, Nicole and Bibaa, were murdered in 2020. You may remember that police officers at the scene shared pictures of it on social media. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us, Muir. First of all, your reaction to the Angelini report.
Well, it's very thorough. I have contributed to the inquiry. I come out in part 2 of section 2. She makes excellent points, but like part 1, it's action that we need. And if you read the report, she sounds really frustrated that not much has.
Hello, Mina, can you hear me? I think we've lost Mina for the moment. We'll come back to her, I'm sure. Meanwhile, good news and bad news for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, this afternoon. Professor David Miles of the OBR has waded into the row about whether she misled the country before the budget, telling MPs that he thought her comments were not inconsistent with the real situation. Now, that's clearly helpful to her. Rather less helpful is the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, saying earlier today that her higher taxes will limit consumer spending and constrain the British economy for years ahead. Let's discuss how she has played the hand she had with a former Conservative Chancellor, Lord Philip Hammond. What was his reaction to the budget?
Well, the Chancellor had to do three things, I think. She had to show that she had the public finances under control. She had to deliver a budget for economic growth. And she had to show that the Labour Party in office had both the ability and the willingness to do something about public spending, to tackle public spending, because in the end, if we don't get public spending under control, there is no future for the UK economy. And I'm afraid she partially succeeded on number one, getting the public finances.
Markets are quite relaxed.
Markets are relaxed. I give her credit for rebuilding headroom so that we have less fluctuations caused by minor shocks in the future. That's a sensible thing to do. But astonishingly, given the rhetoric of her and the Prime Minister about growth, everything's about growth, there was nothing at all in this budget that will support economic growth. And that's a great disappointment. And probably even more important strategically is that the messaging that's come out of the budget and what preceded it is that the Labour Party has given up on trying to control spending. The only spending controls mentioned were the ritual will cut departmental spending limits in an unspecified way 4 years down the line by an amount that is not deliverable. I
can't remember, but I suspect as Chancellor you said that you get great savings too.
I suspect I might have done. Yes, I think all Chancellors do it.
Yeah.
But there was nothing recognising the real challenge that the changes. It's a perfectly respectable position to be in. They could say it without shame that the changing demography that we're facing means that the pressure on public spending will be inexorable, and it cannot be met simply by more tax or more borrowing. So unless they can deliver economic growth, which the budget did nothing to help, there will have to be cuts in public spending, which the budget did not acknowledge in any way.
Well, earlier on today, the OECD more or less said that this budget will constrain growth rather than improve growth. Yeah. When it comes to the specific measures, the tax rises through freezing thresholds come later in the cycle, come nearer the election, and therefore there must be a worry that they won't actually be imposed at all.
Absolutely right. I mean, given that there are going to be 3 more budgets before these come into force, really they're just statements for now of future intention. But the spending and the borrowing, which come next year and the year after, will be very real. And I think, again, Rachel Reeves may live to regret this. The markets are calm about this for the moment, but they may not stay that way.
They're watching very closely. Do you think, therefore, in the end, it was a budget more to secure the position of the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in front of a fractious parliamentary Labour Party than for the economy?
Well, I think that has to be the conclusion. I'm sure Rachel Reeves would say that was unfair. But it has to be the conclusion from the outside, because we are facing these really, I won't say existential, but very serious structural challenges. No real economic growth in per capita GDP for a decade or more. And this huge pressure on public spending, and the budget not tackling either of them, despite the rhetoric of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. It's not that they don't understand it. They very clearly do understand that economic growth is essential to securing the country's future, but they haven't got an answer to deliver it.
I think that long period of no growth explains a lot about the current political turbulence that we're going through.
I totally agree.
What are the measures for growth that you would have put in?
Well, look, the point that somebody has got to stand up and say is that growth doesn't come for free. And when you look at the UK's economy, the challenges, in my view, are on the supply side of the economy. It's about
explain to people.
It's about reducing regulation. It's about getting the tax system right so that it supports entrepreneurs and investors. It's about increasing the amount of goods and services produced in the economy. It's not about there's not enough demand. It's that there isn't effective supply response. We're a very open economy, and too much of the demand that is created is met by imports rather than by British-produced goods and services. And to do that, we've got to be clear that there are trade-offs. The government says it wants to build more houses, a commendable objective, and it will definitely help economic growth. But by building more houses, you will be sacrificing green fields. We should be upfront about that. By deregulating, we will be taking additional risks. But when you remove a regulation, you create more risk. We've got to be prepared to acknowledge
these things.
That there are no free lunches. If we want more growth, we have to accept some of the trade-offs.
We've talked about Europe quite a lot over the years. There are clear signs, I think, today that in recent speeches, Keir Starmer is thinking again about a tilt towards Europe, perhaps going back into the customs union. There are clear dangers of that politically, but what would be the economic impact of that, do you think?
Well, on the political side, I think, the mood in the country is swinging. People are seeing that there is no big economic positive dividend from being outside the European Union. And actually, to be fair, the world has changed quite a lot since the British people made their decision in 2016. We didn't understand that Britain was going to be, as it were, alone in a friendless world, as it now seems to be. On the economic side, the benefits are clear. The European Union is our most important trading partner.
So this would be a pro-growth move?
Absolutely, it would be a pro-growth move. My question is whether the Europeans will be willing to accept the UK back into a closer relationship, not membership of the EU, that's not on the table, but some kind of closer relationship, knowing that there is still a debate about this issue going on in the UK.
When you say the Europeans, we're talking about the French.
We are talking about the French. I mean, I have to say, everything based on my experience through the whole Brexit period is that the Northern Europeans are willing to be quite pragmatic about this and see the value of an association with the UK. The French, and President Macron in particular, has always had a very principled view about this. I'm trying to be generous now. A very principled view about this, which says that anybody who deserts our project has to pay a price. And I think his view is that the British haven't yet paid a big enough price. He will be gone in 2027 anyway, when his term expires. So I think it's right to start having these discussions now. I suspect that real progress may have to wait until the change of the French presidency.
A really big moment, but we may have to bide our time for it. Lord Hammond, thank you very much indeed. Up next, a new Netflix documentary which includes never-before-seen footage of P. Diddy is out tonight. One of the attendees at his infamous white parties tells me of her experiences. Time now, 6:31, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
Smart speaker, just say, play LBC.
6:33. A new Netflix documentary has stirred up again the extraordinary case of the notorious white parties hosted by Sean Combs, or Puff Daddy, or P. Diddy, who was sentenced earlier this year to 50 months in jail on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. One of those present at the parties who's spoken out against the rapper since, the television star Precious Muir, joined me early this afternoon, and she first explained to me how she ended up at these white parties in the first place.
Basically, in 2005 is when I kind of got my contract as a model, and I was introduced into the New York scene from London. And it was an environment where you kind of had to find your way. I'm not lucky enough to have, a rock star dad and, know the photographers and the directors and casting people. I had to start from the ground up.
And P. Diddy at that time, absolutely the top of the top.
He was the kind of person that you wanted an MTV job out of hanging out at one of his parties. And I met some amazing people.
So it's quite competitive, though. Everybody's wandering around, making the next move. Where's the next advance in their careers going to come from? And you're surrounded by sort of Mariah Carey, Justin Bieber, people like that.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the early days, obviously, Justin Bieber wasn't around. No. He's very young. But you saw, the A-list everywhere, when you went to these white parties. And you were exposed to a lot very quickly. And you kind of had to find your feet and find where you were, where your place was. And I didn't make a name for myself till later on. So it was like trying to establish relationships, trying to get to know the right people. And obviously, the good and the bad comes with that.
Just walk us through going into the door to one of these white parties. You've got the gear on, you're white from top to toe.
Yes.
You walk in the door. What do you see? What's it like?
It's kind of an amazement of something you would see in film and you don't think is real until actual reality hits you and you're like, wow, I'm actually here. And so is on that sofa and this person's on that sofa. And you're just like, I can't believe I'm here. It is an amazement. You walk in and it's just champagne and women and, just an environment that you don't think is real.
And what were the women up to? What was going on? What were the men up to as well? Were you aware of what was going on when you first get in there?
I mean, obviously I had experiences leading up to those big white parties. It wasn't something you had access to immediately. You kind of had to go through the smaller parties to get to that big one. And so obviously I had went through a horrific incident that actually occurred before me actually being able to...
Tell us about that.
So I went to the vodka brand that he's was associated with at the time, had a launch party, and I was there. And there was an incident where I was drugged.
You spiked.
I believe there was something that was put in my drink, and I don't have much recollection after what happened to me. And it still stays with me to this day. It's something that will never leave me. It has changed my life completely because I don't trust many people. And people say, why did you then, after that incident later on, go to a white party? I just felt like, I guess this is the environment that I'm in and I have to kind of keep going. And I found the courage to go. You
had one layer of protection, which is that you've never taken drugs.
I have never taken any form of drug other than drinking. So I know there was something in my drink. I mean, my entire face was paralyzed and I completely blacked out. So, I mean, there's obvious that there was something in my drink.
I read that you thought you'd had a stroke. As somebody who has had a stroke,
yes,
you had a sort of facial paralysis.
My face completely, one side was completely dead, like it had gone. The security guard had tried to put some water in to try and sober me up and get me back to life, and it just wouldn't go in. It just
must have been terrifying.
I was terrified. I had no family to call on. Everyone's in London. I was there alone. I was meeting new people. I was around all these new faces. I'm expecting somebody like them, higher in the entertainment industry to be more, I don't know. I didn't expect something like that to happen.
So, Precious, you are in New York in this, frankly, very toxic environment, and there is nobody looking out for you?
Well, I have an agency and an agent and a booker who actually, kind of guide you through these kind of things. You go to castings and stuff like that, but it's not someone that's going to be holding your hand at every event.
They're not family.
No, they're not family. They're not someone you can call for support. When that incident did happen to me the next day, all I was told was to go to see a doctor to be checked out, to make sure I'm okay, and to not take it further and not report it. Not
to report it?
No.
So you're in the White Party later on after this?
Yes. Time had passed. I just want to make that clear by everyone. It's not like that happened and the next day I went to a White Party. Time had passed and I felt like, okay, I need to still obviously progress in my career. I don't have, the luxury of just like sitting back and hoping for the best. Like I have to be active. So I was... After that incident, obviously I must have passed. I didn't report it to the police. So obviously then, okay, she's perfect person to be introduced to the White Party because what happens there will stay there.
So what did happen there?
A lot of things I saw, it was kind of like a place where adults were, it was, like a candy land. It was where people had a great time and enjoyed themselves and women were there, obviously drugs was there and drinking and everyone was having a great time.
Sean has been done for prostitution trafficking, so presumably there was sex going on around the party as well. And it has been said that there were cameras everywhere.
Yeah. So I mean, I was aware that there was cameras in the premises because of the property value and the way that it is so luxurious. And obviously, you know, things can go missing. So they had security cameras. I was told that there are cameras around, just so you know. But I mean, obviously, it's quite crazy because not everybody was allowed into the house. I was allowed to go inside to use the bathroom. That means that I was captured on camera or wherever the cameras may have been. But people there doing stuff probably were aware of those cameras.
Were the people there, do you think, who were being exploited, who'd been brought in to be exploited?
I think that there is an imbalance of power. And when it comes to the imbalance of power, people take advantage of vulnerable people. And talent who are trying to progress in their career are going to try to progress. And, you know, people take advantage of that situation.
And therefore, the suggestion that there are very, very famous people who are at these parties who might have been caught on camera doing things they would never want to be made public, and that might yet be made public, that's not a ridiculous suggestion.
No, I don't think it is. I think it's very apparent now, obviously him having a conviction, that there is a possibility of those types of videos existing. And I think, you know, doing a documentary, I turned down 2 other documentaries to do the BBC documentary. And I'm really glad I did it because it shows that it wasn't just talent in the US. It has affected a lot of women around the world. Any talent that's gone to Hollywood, gone to New York, tried to progress in their career, tried to be successful, has had an impact. This isn't a story just of my own. This is a story of many, many, many models, actresses, actors, many people in the entertainment industry.
Diddy himself has called this documentary a shameful hit job.
I think,
what did you make of it?
I think the documentary is absolutely perfect. I think that it's captured every element of other documentaries, making sure they tell the correct story. And additional, as he has been convicted and now a convicted criminal, in prison, serving prison time, we're now seeing footage that probably wouldn't have been able to be added into the BBC documentary for legal reasons. So now we're seeing the side of him that people hadn't seen. All those little things that he says about the public, people that are championing him, like to get out of prison, not knowing that's the kind of person he really is behind the cameras. And he was so unaware of his whole, you know, being exposed, you know, because he was just saying how he is and so relaxed about it. Yeah. I think the documentary captures the whole element of what he is about. And he's done so much bad to so many people.
The arrogance and the power.
And the karma is coming back. He has done so much to so many people.
Has he gone to prison for long enough?
I don't think so. The prison sentence for the things that he has done, and obviously watching the documentary on Netflix has shown that he has linked with so many other criminal activities. But I think the law is the law, and you have to abide by what was actually in the court at the moment of the prosecutors and all of that stuff. You have to follow those guidelines. You can't put him in prison for something else that you haven't actually brought to court and to obviously we're all aware of.
My last question, Precious. You walked into this world, relatively innocent 20 years ago.
Yes.
Now, presumably this kind of thing is going on in different circumstances even today. What would be your advice to a young woman from London going into this New York environment today?
My point I want to make, and I'm so glad I'm here to be able to make this with you, is that I don't want it to be the fact that I'm saying every single person in the entertainment industry, in hip hop specifically, is a bad person. I've had a personal, professional experience with 50 Cent. When I was younger, I was told to come to one of the offices that he has at 34th Street, Penn Station. 50 Cent and his team were actually doing an interview with young talent. Basically, they would put you on the website. They'll tell, describe all the things that you're doing in your career, give you a nice little write-up with some pictures and stuff like that. The first thing that I had was, when I went into his office, I met with his team. I never felt any sort of uncomfortable situation. I didn't feel like something was going to happen to me.
There are good guys and bad guys.
And there are good guys and bad guys.
And I want to make,
and I think that is the reason why 50 Cent has made this documentary, because he wants to make it clear that people should be speaking up, especially when they have a platform like his, that other people should be holding him accountable. And 50 Cent is doing that. And a lot of people in the entertainment industry are looking at him and saying that's wrong because they're willing to just let it go and not say anything. But at least he's doing something with his platform. And I've had a professional experience with him, and I can understand where he's coming from, that you can go to these offices and you can have castings and can have meetings and nothing happens to you and everything is okay. Not every single person in the industry is like this. There is a lot of them. There is a lot of people who are taking advantage of young talent, but it's not all, especially in the hip-hop industry. I think they have had a bad rap, and every time I've mentioned that I have had positive experiences, not a lot of people want to hear that. And I want to make that clear today, because I feel like it is unfair saying a whole entire entertainment industry is corrupt. There are individuals like Diddy, and there are 50 Cents and many others who want to put a stop to this behaviour.
Well, I'm very glad you've said that. Thank you very, very much indeed, Precious Muir, for coming into LBC. Coming up, more trouble for the Royals as MPs launch an investigation into their financial arrangements for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's former home. But the time now, 6:46. And to Mina Smallman. Mina's a former Church of England priest, and she's now a passionate campaigner for women's safety after her two daughters, Bibaa and Nicole, were murdered in 2020. Police officers who attended the scene were convicted of taking pictures, and she's here to give me her reaction to the Angiolini report exploring women's safety, which was released earlier on today. Mina, very good to be talking to you again. Let me just go through some of the recommendations in the report, because they're very important. They include a programme to promote positive masculinity and encouragement to people to report crimes such as indecent exposure, because that seems to be where a lot of really serious offending begins.
Yeah, that kind of, it's a starting point. People start with those kind of gateway behaviours, and they should be taken seriously. And I think because of Cousins, we recognise that now. The issue is that, and the really important point she makes in the inquiry, is that this cannot be achieved by one organisation or one institution. There needs to be some joint-up thinking. And there's some excellent work being done by charities, by different organisations, but nothing is actually dealing with the problem. And so we need some joined-up thinking. And we need to pull together something like a gold group, the same thing that they pull together for crises, that we need to get education, health, mental health, police, the government together to make things happen. Because this is yet another inquiry and nothing gets done.
Certainly, there's a lot of evidence that police forces are very, very different in the way they approach these things, and they do need to be brought together. But I'm very interested in just some of the positive ideas that are in this report, because we often accentuate the negative. But there is, for instance, something called Project Vigilant, which, as I understand it, focuses on men who have been following women around and targeting them, and includes using undercover police to get to them. Very important initiative, used by some police forces, but not others.
Yeah. I think people won't understand that each constabulary works in their own silo, and there's somewhat of competition going on. They want to be the one that's cracks it. And the worst for that is the Met. The Met don't want to share their toys with anybody. And this actually prohibits good work to be shared across the country. And so I went into work with the Met recently, and one of the big problems is that the vetting and also following on, when people work for the Met, every time they join a new department, they start with a clean slate. So there's no record keeping of bad behaviour. So people like Cousins and Carrick, they got a clean start every time they move department. Now, this is ridiculous. And actually, some of that isn't about the police being ineffective. It's that their record keeping and their data resources are so out of date that they often can't do the work that needs to be done.
Broad question, but reading the Angiolini report, do you think that the safety of women and girls in public spaces has got any better since what happened to your daughters 5 years ago?
No. And sadly, I think it's not reported as much as it should be. You know, attacks and assaults are happening, and we've seen from statistics up to, I think, 70% of young women said that they didn't feel safe in the country. And certainly public areas are notorious. They're underlit. There aren't, people or places or hubs that a person could run to in an emergency.
And that's something that could be dealt with, because again, the report is suggesting that the police should be involved alongside architects and town planners and the rest of it in redesigning public spaces to make them safer, brighter and more secure, particularly for women and girls.
Exactly. And, something as simple as having sensor lights in parks so that if you were walking past and you could see that someone was behind you because the lights would come on, and there needs to be sort of emergency telephone boxes that, if your phone was taken, you could cause the alarm, if you see what I mean.
Another thing that really struck me was this suggestion of a so-called Good Samaritan law to encourage passers-by or observers to intervene if they think somebody is in trouble. Now, I can see the problems for that because it could be dangerous to intervene, but it's an interesting attempt to tilt or change public perceptions and public behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, we know that assaults happen and people stand by and do nothing, not because they're bad people, but they're concerned that they're actually going to be injured. And we have instances where people have been injured. I think we're now in a time where we need everybody to take accountability for the safety of women and girls. And one of the things I think we could do is, silence the noise around people like Andrew Tate and raise up positive male role models. And I'd love to see men, in the same way that the time's up, celebrity males, people in the music business, people who have power and influence, actually a national demonstration led by men, rallying men and saying, we are the good guys and there are more of us than there are bad, and we will not allow you to hurt our women and girls. That's what we need. We need to see that kind of action because, men are being vilified. Some men are being vilified and they don't deserve it. But come on, men, it's time to stand up and show that you are supporting the women.
Now, there is a rousing trumpet blast for everyone to listen to. Finally, I was reading what Sarah Everard's mother said today, and I'll just read a bit of it to you. She said, I go through a turmoil of emotions, sadness, rage, panic, guilt and numbness. They used to all come in one day, but as time goes by, they're more widely spaced. And to some extent, time blunts the edges. I'm not yet at the point where happy memories of Sarah come to the fore. When I think of her, I can't get past the horror of her last hours. Just your feelings about that and whether you think that process is common to those who have lost loved children, loved daughters in those horrendous circumstances.
She is such a beautiful person, so gentle, so kind, so wise. And yes, I of course, I recognise those emotions. And many of the mothers that I've spoken to and families who have lost their daughters to femicide would understand exactly what that feels like. It never goes away. And actually, every time we hear, when I call the we, it's that exclusive group that you'd never want to be part of. Every time we hear that a woman and a girl has been murdered at the hands of a man, we relive the nightmare. It never goes away.
Mina, a word that's too often used by people in broadcasting is that it's a privilege to listen to you. But I think everybody listening into LBC tonight will feel it has been a genuine privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for that. A committee of MPs have launched an investigation into the royal estate over the lease deal that Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor had with the Royal Lodge before he was booted out of the house in October. Norman Baker is the author of And What Do You Do? What the Royal Family Don't Want You to Know, as well as Royal Mint, National Debt. Norman, very good to have you on the show tonight. First of all, your response to the news that a committee of MPs are now going to look into the royal estate, the Crown estate, and the lease around the Royal Lodge.
Well, it's not just the Royal Lodge. They're looking into the whole dealings of the royal family with the Crown estate. The fact is, as I set out in my book, there are 50 properties which the King or the Queen before him has commandeered from the Crown estate for use as grace and favour properties. They won't tell us where they are or whether they're being paid a market rent. And we don't know even how many grace and favour properties there are in total. So this does need to be looked into. It's not just Andrew, of course. We know from Edward has in the 120-room mansion paying a peppercorn rent, and they are looking at that as well. But overall, we did an investigation to royal finances generally because, rather than picking a pimple, let's look at the whole body.
Norman, is your contention that these properties and other property are owned or should be owned by the state and not personally by the royal family, and that is the nub of the problem?
Well, they are essentially owned by the state because the Crown estate, contrary to public view, is actually a public body. It has been since 1760 when their deal was struck with the royal family back in those days. But however, in some sort of mishmash, the King or Queen at the time was able to ask the Crown estate for use of a property, commandeer it effectively, and of course the Crown estate is in no position then to charge a market rent.
A very, very important story. We're going to cover this, I'm sure, in the next days and weeks ahead. Norman Baker, thank you so much for coming on to the show, however briefly. Now, if you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you would like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
To abolish jury trials for any case which carries a sentence of less than 3 years. He says we can't just stick to tradition for the sake of it. This isn't about tradition, it's about defending our civil liberties and our ability to be tried by 12 of our peers. In the end, he's ripping up our legal system, which has stood